Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with an updated list after the ban of Smuggler's Copter for the green-black tokens. A lot of you have been asking for this particular update now that Smuggler's Copter is banned and Reflector Mage is banned and Emrakul is banned, and it's kind of a weird opportunity. The bans are current now on MTGO, and I've been looking over the metagame, and to no surprise, it is kind of reverting back to a little bit of the decks that existed pre-Kaladesh, actually. So before Smuggler's Copter really had an influence, T-Merge, for example, is a deck that seems to have come back. Green-white tokens, humans. I haven't seen many vehicles. Green-red energy would be the one Kaladesh deck that seems to be winning, and Dynavolt Tower. Those ones have been the decks that have posted the best numbers in the limited amount of information that we have from the competitive leagues. So I went back to the Golgari tokens because this was an incredibly good deck against when the format was more of the I would say vehicles based format, but pre-Emrakul, when U-White Flash really started to try to combat the Marvel decks, and the Marvel decks adjusted by going all into Ishkanaz and into Chandras. So that the Ishkanaz Chandra setup was very, very hard for this deck to beat. Also, the green-black Delirium, when they really went into the heavy Emrakul build, like stall to get to Emrakul, that was another matchup that was tough for this deck to beat, so I gave up on the deck, as it was no longer good. When this deck really was good was when U-White Flash, right after the Pro Tour, was one of the top dogs, because this deck could easily just go toe-to-toe with U-White Flash, as they weren't really doing anything for the first, trying to set up like an Avacyn, trying to set up a Gideon, and then by that point we could actually set up the combo with the Westvale Abbey off the Marionette Master. And we were just a lot of times the jump was just in our favor. You weren't in any threat of getting run over by vehicles-based decks, and now these human-based strategies even seem weaker than vehicles. I think they're a lot less explosive. This deck was also pretty decent of controlling the board or just clogging up the board versus green-red energy, the aggro energy, and typical decks with the T-Merge type strategies, this deck can recover from quite well. So I think I'm going to try it again. There was a lot of decks that seemed to finish quite highly, a bunch of 5-0 finishes with just white-green tokens. And I think I'd build it differently. They're not using the Angel of Invention. They're just using Nissa, Gideon, and Avacyn, just a lot of good stuff of the white. So it's almost like white blue flash, but instead of going for Spellcore and Reflector Mage, they just adjusted and went for like Thalia, and Selva Spirit was still in it, but then Nissa to compensate for the loss of blue. So I think that is the perfect deck for this one to exploit, because we just do tokens better. The game is going to get clogged up, and between the Weaponcraft Enthusiast and the Catacomb Sifter, and then eventually into the Marionette Master, I just think this deck does a lot better of clogging the board and then having that one-turn combo to just win. Those decks traditionally don't have an answer for Westvale Abbey because they use Declaration and Stone, and Westvale Abbey is something that it can die to Declaration Stone, but usually when we go for the attack with Westvale Abbey, we just win. So I have a ton of gameplay with this deck in the past. Let's just go over the deck tech. It will get updates from the Aether Revolt, but of course Aether Revolt is not out on MTGO at the moment, so you would probably want cards like the Fatal Push, and I think the one drop of, as far as the Night Market Lookout, can be replaced with the other rogue. When it comes into play, it gives a creature -1/-1. There is also the Elf that puts +1/+1 counters on 2 creatures, and those can tap for mana. That absolutely wants to go in this deck. It'll probably take the replacement of Duskwatch Recruiter. So my first replacement was Smuggler's Copter was in this deck. It had great synergy with the Night Market Lookout and the Zulaport Cutthroat, as well as you could at least use one of the Weaponcraft Enthusiast tokens to crew it, or the Catacomb Sifter. So all of those made the Smuggler's Copter very good. Smuggler's Copter had some synergy in this deck, mainly in the form of Voldalin Pariah. But all in all, this Smuggler's Copter just helped fix our draws. And so every deck was running it. It just made our deck fair versus their decks, because one of the best ways to combat Smuggler's Copter was Smuggler's Copter. So I don't think there's a need for it. I think Night Market Lookout could be replaced if you go into a heavier swamp build forest build, and put just the 1/1 Death Toucher. I think that's fine. We can also put in the 2/2 with Reach Snake over Duskwatch Recruiter, or the Sylvan Advocate. But I really think the Duskwatch Recruiter has the most to gain because of the ability for this to flip and then have, like, even the Marionette Master cost one less is huge, or the Weapon Crest Enthusiast cost one less, meaning you can actually cast 2 cards in one turn, and it really speeds up what our deck is trying to do. So I think Duskwatch is the best replacement for the Smuggler's Copter. Other than that, the deck is entirely the same. That it just ran 4 Smuggler's Copters and 1 Voldown Pariah, and this was the list. The sideboard got a lot different because I was pretty much trying to combat Aetherworks Marvel, and I was never really successful. I had a couple Sigardas. Like, if you could hit a Sigarda on time, then the Emrakul couldn't take your turn, but you still had to deal with Emrakul, so I had ways to make them sack it, or I was using actually well, you usually don't want to keep those in. I think that was one that the Delirium Sacrifice a Creature or Planeswalker card was the best way to combat it, and running a lot of, like, Transgress the Minds, Pick the Brains, and the Exile spell, the Lost Legacy. But I don't think that there's really a point to running Lost Legacy at the moment. There's not a lot of cards that I have to worry about too much. This deck does really good against coming back from board wipes. Lost Legacy was good in the past for getting rid of, like, Thing in the Ices versus those control decks that only ran Thing in the Ices to win con, because if you could just get rid of their win con, then they can't win. And so the deck that was running, I think the Pro Tour winning deck was running like 2 Torrential Gearhulks, 4 Thing in the Ices, and then their the land, the man land, Wandering Fumarole. So if you got rid of Thing in the Ice, then a Torrential Gearhulk's never going to get through a bunch of tokens, and neither is the Wandering Fumarole. It was really the Thing in the Ice to basically return back your board and then swing in a few turns and just get you down. So I'm not worried about that deck anymore. And so what we are going to do for the sideboard is we're going to kill Gideon. So 4 Ruinous Paths are in the sideboard. I do have 1 Lost Legacy still in the mix because there might be a deck or 2 where Lost Legacy will be relevant. This could easily be another Liliana, 2 Noxious Gearhulks, and 2 Kalatoses. So between we can turn into kind of a control route with Grasp of Darkness, Ruinous Paths, and Kalatos. Those work out very well. Appetite the Natural is still good. It can still get rid of Stasis Snare in Quarantine Fields, and there's certainly an amount of decks that are trying to run Quarantine Field again. As I think now, the problem with, like, Stasis Snare and Quarantine Field is they were just collateral damage to all the cards that were combating the Smuggler's Copter, and so it was just, I don't know, it was just a bad card to, especially Quarantine Field, to try to get value out of it when so many people had Artifact hate. So Appetite will still kill every now and again Aetherworks Marvel type decks that are really trying to go the value route. So in the past, I didn't really didn't care about killing a Marvel. I think that at this point you do need to kill an Aetherworks Marvel if there still are some decks going around. Speaking of which, the other deck that I think is well positioned is a deck that I was very successful with Aetherworks Marvel, which was the Aetherworks Angels, which I don't know if I'd make any changes to this deck, because instead of Emrakul, what it tried to do is it tried to get Gisela Bruna. I think I'd go up in the count of Nahiris and go up in the count of Chandras. I've made different versions of this deck. I think the Mary Shepherd is just down to a 1-of. It's just a nice card to have. And Linval is kind of go over the sideboard. It's just like 1 and 1. And I think that I put 2 Chandras in here. So 2 Nahiris, 2 Chandras, as they are ways to ramp up to the Bruna a little bit quicker if you don't have the Marvel. But this deck still works pretty well. The Gisela plays the kind of the defensive, unless it eats like early removal spells, and then you cast the Bruna, get the Gisela back, and the Bruna flips. And there are still very few decks that can combat a Priscilla, because most of the removal in the format is converted mana cost 3 or less. So those are kind of the decks that I think I'd have to go to. I know people are still sick of Aetherworks Marble, it's too much like the old one, but I had a lot of success with this deck. So didn't run 1 Emrakul in this list. It was mostly, I had to admit, after I played this deck over and over, that the right call was to play Emrakul. It was just better than the Angel strategy, but the Angel strategy wasn't far off. So that's a few things I'm working with. I'm going to go ahead and queue up some of the black-green tokens, see if we can take down a lead. And then possibly tomorrow being Sunday, actually it's Sunday right now, it's way late at night, but I'm way too caffeinated to go to bed. I'm not going to do live stream, but tomorrow I might do live stream if I get some time. And we'll play these 2 decks, maybe mess around with a few other decks. Again, looking over the metagame, it looks like a lot of black-white tokens in the form of Gideon and Liliana, so either black-white control with like a token-based strategy, I saw a deck with like Eiley and Thalia, and still have the Thraven Inspector, and then they have Liliana and Gideon. And so there's kind of like a good stuff black-white deck, then a good stuff green-white deck. It seems like green-black Delirium is back, but the card that killed me in green-black Delirium was 100% Emrakul. That was the card I couldn't stop. The rest of the cards, Liliana can be a little bit painful, Kalatos can be a little bit painful, but with the black-green tokens, those were the two, or the Emrakul, the inevitable Emrakul was the winning card versus this particular deck. So I'm hoping to have success with this in a metagame that seems more mid-range. So we'll queue this up, see how it goes. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Deck list in the description. Thanks for watching.
The shrines awaken once more. Who will control the Dragon Knight's power?
Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com, here with a top 10 list of cards that I'm most excited to brew around from Aether Revolt. This is an ongoing tradition at RogueDeckBuilder.com. Whenever a new set is spoiled or shortly thereafter, I give my top 10 list of the cards that I personally am most excited to brew around. As many of you may know, if you've watched my channel before, I am first and foremost a brewer. So for those of you who are looking for a top 10 list of the most powerful cards, this may not be the list for you. There are definitely more powerful cards that are going to impact Standard and Modern and other formats, but these are my personal favorites out of the set. So without further ado, let's go down the list. Coming in at number 10. Number 10 is a card that I was very critical of, a kind of sister card of this, which was during Journey to Nyx, which was Athreos. Athreos had the ability, whenever a non-token creature went to the graveyard, you return it to your hand unless an opponent paid 3 life. So I think why I didn't like Athreos is it was in a color combination that I didn't feel was quite aggressive enough to be justifying to be playing that sort of strategy at the time being. Whereas Pia's Revolution, which is my number 10 card, I think is the perfect color for a card that wants to do this type of effect. I also think that artifacts are just as relevant, or not, or even more relevant for an effect like this to recur. Whereas we already have shells, especially in like Modern, that have recurring themes of artifacts. So Pia's Revolution is going to give your option, the opponent, to take 3 damage, or it's going to go back to your hand for rinse and repeat. So in Standard, I like this with the implements, especially the implement of Combustion. We have a lot of recurring strategies, as I said before, with artifacts in the Modern format. A whole eggshell was built around this sort of thing, and this could be an enabler for those type of strategies. I think this card gets better with the more cards printed. It adds a nice little spin to the Frontier format as far as more artifacts being relevant. We already have a card called Hangerback Walker that wants to be sacrificed a lot of times, or just wants to chump block to get some 1/1 tokens back. And we even have cards that we want to sort of protect, at least get some value out of in the artifact slot. So I really like this card. I think there's a lot of potential to it. On to my number 9 card. Number 9 would probably be ranked higher on this list if there weren't so many people already talking about this. I am a rogue, therefore I like to go strategies that aren't well known. I like to come up with new ideas, not really repeat ideas that are out there. And this card, Inspiring Statuary, is getting a lot of buzz in the different circles. It says non-artifact spells you cast have improvise. So this card has tons of potential, especially if you can go back to like legacy type cards where you're using artifacts. If you have a lot of artifacts that don't generate mana, a lot of some of these in Modern especially, some of these artifacts that are just used, like even like Pithing Needles, for example, can then be tapped to be used to actually cast spells. Where I really like this is in Standard with the Devoid cards, especially the colorless Eldrazi spells are not artifacts. So it can get the Thought-Knot Seer down to just a colorless source, or the Reality Smasher down to just a colorless source, or any of the like the Emerge type cards that were just had the colorless mana in them. We have the Eldrazi Mimics, things like that could actually be cast for free or just by tapping artifacts. The Inspiring Statuary itself can be used to tap to add a colorless mana or mana pool to cast spells. And so as far as a ramp strategy is concerned, this is pretty cool. Again, it doesn't work with other artifacts, so the colorless mana has a finite amount that it can actually do, because you'll need to still make colored mana. But I think this is a very interesting card, especially the further back you go. There's got to be some busted things you can do with it, and I'm definitely looking forward to brewing this card, particularly having this be the focal point of upcoming brews in the future. On to my number 8. Number 8 is a card that might be more wishful thinking than anything. I've always really liked the Black Burn, is what I like to call it. We had cards in the Alms of the Vein with the Madness 3 damage, or target opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. And I've always wanted that sort of archetype to work, and we have Bump in the Night in Modern. We're almost there to just do a Soul Black Burn, Mono Black Burn, or even Black Red Burn now in Standard is really, really pushed with Gonti's Machinations. This card is an enchantment, which I think is very relevant, because in any sort of enchantment, like Enchantress or recurring enchantment theme, I know that there already is a few cards that get an enchantment back from the graveyard in Standard. There's a couple white creatures, I believe, that do so. Maybe one gets an R. There's one that can sacrifice to get an enchantment, I believe. I might be wrong on this, but as far as going back into like modern playability and other ones, there is a lot of enchantment recurring strategies. And this one says whenever you lose a life for the first time, you get an energy, and then you can pay 2 energy to sacrifice Gonti's Machinations. Each opponent loses 3 life. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. So this is going back to a theme that was replaced by you just gain that particular amount of life. So if it loses 3 life, you gain 3 life. But because we had like Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and we had the cards out of the Orzhov Guild, I can't think of the mechanic off the top of my head, that gain life equal to the amount of life lost. In Commander, that was just a lot of life gained, and they figured that it was giving too much advantage to these type of cards, and cards like Zulaport Cutthroat no longer did that. So it's kind of cool that the Machinations is going back to this. So say you have 4 opponents, you'll gain 12 life. If you have 3 opponents, 9 life, and so forth. But even in one-on-one, this seems like a very 1 mana for 3 damage, 3 life is an incredibly, and now we have 2 of those in the Standard format. Now Alms does get a lot worse with the Smuggler's Copter banning, as it was one of the premier ways to discard it and get the cheaper discounted price to lose 3 life and gain 3 life. But I still think that even 2 of them in the same format, in the same Standard format, might be enough to make this viable, because that's a lot of life lost and a lot of life gained. It's a 6-point swing. And there's even other cards that kind of have these draining type effects right now in the Standard format. We saw some ally strategies like Zulaport Cutthroat and a few of the vampire allies that drained your opponent. And then we have even the Rogue, the Night Market Lookout, that kind of does that drain effect as well. So I really like the Gonti's Machinations. I don't think it's very hard to gain 2 energy, even a deck that doesn't have a way to gain energy. And an enchantment in the graveyard could help out with Delirium type strategies, even though I don't know if Delirium wants a particular card like this. On to my number 7. Number 7 is a card that probably should rank higher, because the more I look at it, the more I love it. This card is Lifecraft Awakening. X and a green. Instant speed, I think that's incredibly relevant. Put X/1/1 counters on target artifact you control. If it isn't a creature or vehicle, it becomes a 0/0 construct artifact creature. So this card is super cool end of turn to even like a Prophetic Prism to animate it. But where I like this is it does have the versatility to be put on creatures. So think Fingerback Walker here. If Smuggler's Copter was still in the format, that would have been a beautiful target to pump up your Smuggler's Copter and then have those counters stick around. Where I'm really liking this is like Blink Moth or Ink Moth Nexus. This is both of those cards want counters, and they of course stick around. Arcbound Ravager, it might breathe some life, pun intended, into green being an artifact color. Traditionally, green is usually probably the least thought of color that works with artifacts. It's supposed to be like a natural type color, so there's a lot of ways to destroy artifacts, but not a lot of ways to enable artifacts. And so with this set with Lifecraft Awakening, this is a pretty sweet ability. Pretty hard to scale even here, but you'd have to go all in on artifacts, which actually might not be too much of a stretch with the amount of constructs that use +1/+1 counters, especially the Hangerback Walker. And we even had a few of them spoiled in this set. I believe there is there's a walking, was it Ballista? I think is what it's called. It wants +1/+1 counters on it, and you can remove a +1 counter to do damage to a creature player. So there's a ton of synergy with this card. With the more cards printed, the better it becomes. And it's not even bad to put on a vehicle. You don't have to make it permanent animated target for the counters to stick around. So Darksteel Citadel is another card that I think this is really cool, or even Darksteel Ignite, to put an indestructible and actually have it be a creature. So just some food for thought with this awesome card. If you ever played from Hell from Beyond clear back in the day, the Hell from Beyond type effects, instant speed, were quite good. They scaled well. Usually there's better ways just to individually pump something like +3/3 or +5/5. We sub larger than life. But I think the key is these counters stick around. On to my number 6. I wanted to avoid the Revolt mechanic just because I thought it was, most of the cards I were picking right off the bat were a little too spiky for me, and Revolt was a real spike mechanic, especially with the fetch lands. Revolt's going to be a little bit tougher to enable in Standard, but in Frontier Forward, or Frontier Back, we have the fetch lands that really enable Revolt. So this is the only Revolt card that ended up settling on, which is Aid from the Cowl. Aid from the Cowl is a 5-mana enchantment, and it says the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a permanent card, you put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. I think that is very relevant. It says you may put it on the bottom of your library, so you can keep it on top if you want it. So if it ends up being a spell that, like an Eldritch Evolution, for example, which will enable your aid for the next turn, you can still keep it on top. And if it's a permanent card, it gets cheated into play. Now this only happens at the beginning of your end step. You can actually enable it on your turn by sacrificing something. And I just really like the sacrifice. If you watched my channel before, green and black are probably my favorite color combination. And mainly because there's a lot of like morbid type effects that work off synergizing and sacrificing creatures. Eldritch Evolution is one of my favorite cards that's still in Standard. Evolutionary Leap is one of my favorite cards from the Origins time period. And I think Aid from the Cowl works really well with those type of cards. Even though, yeah, it says just a permanent, so you can sacrifice tokens quite easily. You can even sacrifice clue tokens to get some value off of this. So they even think Tireless Tracker with this card. I think there's some amazing synergies. The 5 mana is a bit iffy, but I think if the card has 5 mana in it, it needs to have some sort of effect immediately. And I think there's a lot of ways to enable that immediately in the Standard format. They have a lot of free sacking. We do get 2 free sack outlets, some Nantuko Husk wannabes with some of the Aetherborns. I believe both of them are Aetherborns. So I think both of those can enable an Aid from the Cowl. But I think they're just clue tokens in general are great ways to enable from then on out. So Tireless Tracker is what I'm looking at with this card. On to my number 5. Number 5 is a pretty duh card. It probably would be higher up on my list if it wasn't legendary, and again, more people weren't talking about it. And this is SRAM, Senior Edificer. Legendary creature, Dwarf Advisor. When you cast an R equipment or vehicle, draw a card. Huge synergies with this card. I think that being a legendary is kind of, it balances it though, because if you have multiples of this out, of course you can just go crazy. But we all know the power of Pure Steel Paladin, and this is a Pure Steel Paladin that can actually